Hey friends and family, back here again to talk about the problem of evil. And we're going to be dealing with the question, can God exist with all the evil in the world, or does evil disprove God exists? And I think when someone makes a statement about evil, I believe they're presupposing many things. They're standing on a foundation that can only be explained from a theistic perspective, and they maybe haven't thought about it in this way. So let's get into it. Evil is defined in this way: a departure from the way things ought to be, or a departure from the good. And so when we say things ought to be different, people shouldn't be getting sick, people shouldn't be dying, this is not right, we are presupposing something is right. And as soon as you say something is not right, you assume it should be another way. And there has to be someone who sets what ought to happen. So we are assuming that there's objective purpose to life when we believe there's evil, that there's direction, and that there's a standard to this life that is not being lived out. And I think this is a good way to understand it. You can't tell what is good or bad unless you know what the purpose is. I'm a soccer player, so I like this analogy. In soccer, how do you know that a pass intercepted or a pass received is better? Well, you would only know if you knew what the purpose of the game was. And if there's no purpose to the game, we can't say doing good is better than doing evil, or that some things even are evil if there's no purpose, objective standard. And this leads us to ask, who has set up this objective purpose, this standard? When you assume that there is evil and things aren't going the way things should be, you assume that there's a standard beyond humanity that has set all this up. And there has to be an unchanging standard of moral goodness outside of humanity in order to say it's objective. And that would be God's nature. And it has to be objective. Because if it's not God, it would just be one person's opinion against another, and that would be subjected with no grounds to acknowledge anything is even evil. If it's just one opinion against another, what are the grounds to acknowledge it as even being evil if everyone has different opinions about it? And I think there's general things in this culture that we can agree on. I'm only talking about a few of them, but genocide is bad. Rape is a bad thing. They're evil things. And how can they be bad if there's not an objective standard that we need to meet and maintain? And Richard Dawkins said, DNA neither cares nor knows. DNA just is, and we dance to its music. We are just molecule machines, molecules in motion. And if this worldview is true, what Richard Dawkins says, evil doesn't exist. You can't even ask a question or have a problem with evil in this world. And that's why you can't take this worldview if you believe evil exists, if you believe certain things in this life are wrong. And so you stand on a theistic perspective to make a statement about evil. So how can you impose a moral obligation on another person if there's not a transcendent moral law outside of ourselves? It raises a lot of questions. And when we depart from this teaching in school that there's a moral law that we need to maintain, because when we pull God out of school, we start implementing more things like evolution. And I think microevolution is real. But when we teach kids that, violence, death, and bloodshed are a natural part of our evolutionary mechanism that produce man, how can we get mad at kids in school when they go in and they shoot everyone up? That's just a natural part of our evolution. I know that this isn't right, but we believe there's moral things that should be upheld. And I think that's why Jordan B. Peterson talks about so much about the implication of when our culture departs from a Christian worldview, what happens when we push him out of our school and our teachings. The foundation of moral obligations that we have are lost when we distance ourselves from God's absolutes. And so what does the Bible, how can we make sense of this? What is God, if it's real, what did God say about it? Why does it make sense for God to be the foundation that we're standing on when we make this statement? Well, he says in Jeremiah 31:33, "This is the covenant I will make with the people of Israel. After that time, declares the Lord, I will put my law in their minds and write it on their hearts. I will be their God, and they will be my people." God's written law is on our hearts. And I think this argument by Stephen Davis, who is a philosopher, kind of helped me understand it a little bit more. Here's how his argument goes. Genocide is departure from the way things ought to be. If genocide is a departure from the way things ought to be, there's a way things ought to be. And if there's a way things ought to be, then there is a design plan for things. And if there's a design plan for things, then there is an author of the plan, a designer. When things are designed, we assume that there is a designer. And this designer we can call God. And you can't convince me, and I think I can convince you easily, that when we see something designed, we know that there's a designer. You can't tell me your car didn't have a designer. So I want you to understand the implications when we make a statement of evil. And it really only makes sense if God exists. You know, God is so intertwined with our reality because he's the creator, the designer, and this world can't exist without him. The way that we function internally, because this is what God's put on our hearts and on our minds, should reveal the truth of this world. And I want you guys to think about this differently. And I think this argument is that evil actually proves God does exist. He's afoot, he's real, guys. He has not hidden himself. He's interwebbed in our life, in our world, in our minds. And we just need to look for him sometimes. Just open our eyes and just try to make sense of it. If you guys have any questions, please feel free to reach out and chat with me. Bye.